The war was over, or so everyone thought. The sky was red and broken, ships burned across the empty ground. The air smelled of smoke, blood, and melted metal. Bodies lay scattered, motionless alien and human alike. But one body moved, just a little. It was an alien warrior, tall, silver-skinned female named Taraxa. Her armor was cracked, one leg badly burned, and her breathing was shallow. She tried to speak, but only a soft whisper came out. "I'm alive." Taraxa's vision was blurry, her body weak. She reached out toward the sky. But no one came. Her people, the Zarnak, had already left. They thought she was dead, and they had orders not to take the injured. "Leave them," they said. "Focus on survivors." So they left her bleeding, broken, forgotten. She tried to move, but cried out as pain shot through her leg. She tasted blood in her mouth and felt the cold of death creeping in. Her mind screamed that it wasn't fair. She had fought bravely, killed enemies, saved her squad, but none of it mattered now. Alone, she closed her eyes, waiting for the end. Then, footsteps. Someone was walking slowly through the wreckage. She opened her eyes again, forcing them to stay open. A shadow moved across the smoke-human shape, armored. Holding a rifle, she held her breath, thinking it was an enemy soldier coming to finish her, but the figure didn't attack. Instead, the human paused near her body and stared down. His name was Grant, a tired, bleeding, exhausted soldier. He had been looking for his friend's body, but found her instead. He raised his rifle halfway, then stopped. Her eyes looked up at him, glowing faintly. Full of pain and confusion, he could see she was hurt badly, but still alive. Her armor showed she was a commander. He could leave her there. No one would blame him. She was the enemy, after all. But Grant didn't move. He lowered his rifle and knelt down beside her. "You still breathing?" he asked softly. She blinked once, surprised by the question. "Why?" She managed to whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened his pack, took out a small water pouch, and gently held it to her lips. She hesitated. Was it poison? A trick? But thirst won over fear, and she drank, coughing softly. Her hand trembled as it touched his wrist, too weak to hold on. "You're not gonna die here," Grant said, almost to himself. "You're not going out like this." He looked around. No one was watching. The comms were down. The medevac was gone. No orders, no backup, just him and her, and the silence of the battlefield. Taraxa tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "You help me. I killed your kind." Grant nodded, eyes calm. "Yeah, well, I've seen enough killing for one war." He looked at her wounds, then back at her face. "You want to live." She gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable. "Then don't fight me," he said, pulling her up gently. She groaned in pain but didn't resist. He lifted her slowly, supporting her weight. She was taller than him, heavier too, but he didn't let go. Step by step, he guided her to a half-destroyed escape pod nearby. Inside, it was dark and dusty, but safer than the open field. He sat her down carefully and covered her with his cloak. Her breathing slowed, more stable now. Grant sat across from her, cleaned his wounds silently. She watched him, confused, suspicious, yet curious. "Name?" she asked weakly. He looked up. "Grant Taraxa," she replied. Eyes closing slowly, they sat in silence. Two enemies trapped by war, but something had changed. He had a chance to walk away, to leave her like her own people did. But he stayed, because some part of him believed no one deserved to die alone, not even an alien warrior from the other side. Outside, the wind howled and smoke rose high into the red sky. Inside the broken pod, a human and an alien, once enemies, rested in uneasy peace, and that was how their strange story began. Taraxa woke to the smell of something warm. She opened her eyes slowly and saw firelight flickering inside the wrecked escape pod. Her body still hurt badly, but the burning pain in her leg had dulled a little. She turned her head slightly and saw the human Grant sitting near the fire. He wasn't wearing his helmet anymore, and his face looked tired but calm. His armor was scratched, and blood was dried on his arms, but he was focused on cooking something over the flames. She blinked in confusion. Why was he still here? Why hadn't he left her? Grant noticed her looking. "You're awake," he said, voice quiet. She coughed before replying. Still breathing. Grant nodded. "Good." Taraxa looked around, her hands weakly feeling her body. Her weapon was gone, probably lost during the battle. Still, she felt uneasy. Trapped in a small space with a human soldier, she tried to sit up but groaned. The pain too sharp. Grant got up and helped her without saying a word. She was surprised by his gentle touch. Enemies didn't act like this. This was something else. Why? "Help me," she asked, struggling with her words. Her voice was dry and low, but her eyes showed sharp curiosity. Grant shrugged. "You were still alive." "That's not a reason," she said slowly. "We are not friends." Grant looked at her, then handed her a small bottle of water. "No, we're not," he said, "but I don't leave people behind." She stared at him, not trusting, but not refusing the water. She drank it in small sips, keeping her eyes on him the whole time. "You should have left," she whispered. "Like my people did." Grant poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the air. "Yeah, I could have," he said, "but I didn't." There was silence between them. Only the crackling fire and the distant wind filled the quiet space. Grant broke a ration bar in half and held out a piece to her. She looked at it like it was a strange weapon. "Eat," he said. "It's not poisoned." Taraxa took it slowly, her clawed fingers brushing his skin. The touch surprised them both warm. Soft, real. She chewed carefully. The food bland but better than nothing. After a few bites, she spoke again. Taraxa. Grant looked up. "What?" "My name," she said. "Taraxa." He nodded slowly. Grant, names meant something. Names made people feel real, not just soldiers or enemies. Now they weren't just alien and human. They were Taraxa and Grant, two broken fighters. Sitting by the same fire, Taraxa rested her head back against the wall of the pod. "I never thought I'd be saved by your kind," she muttered. "I never thought I'd save yours." Grant replied, almost smiling. She glanced at him with half-lidded eyes. "Are you always this strange?" Grant chuckled softly, "Only on days that end in smoke and blood." They sat in silence again, but this time it felt different, not heavy. Just quiet, like two people who had seen too much to talk fast. After a while, Taraxa whispered, "You could still leave, I know," Grant said, tossing another stick into the fire. "But you won't." "No," he replied simply. "Why?" she asked again, her voice nearly a breath. He looked into the fire before answering. "Because if I was you wounded, left behind, I'd want someone to stay." She blinked slowly, her breathing slowing. "No one's ever said that to me." "Before? Well, now someone has," Grant said, pulling a blanket over her shoulders. "Get some rest." Taraxa closed her eyes, still unsure what tomorrow would bring, but tonight. She wasn't alone, and even though her leg burned and her body ached, somehow her heart felt a little lighter outside. The wind still blew over the dead battlefield, but inside the pod, something rare had formed a fragile thread of trust. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a start. Grant woke up to the sound of breathing heavy, fast, and painful. He opened his eyes quickly and saw Taraxa twisting in her sleep. Her body shook, sweat dripping from her forehead. Her burned leg was bleeding again, and her claws scratched. The metal floor, she was in pain, bad pain. Grant rushed to her side. "Taraxa, hey, wake up," he said firmly. She didn't respond, just whimpered softly like a wounded animal. He grabbed a cloth and his small first aid kit. There wasn't much left, just one injector for pain, some bandages, and a small healing patch he pulled off the dirty wrap on her leg and winced. The wound had opened again. It was deep, angry, and red. He cleaned it quickly. Trying not to hurt her more, she gasped and opened her eyes. Her hand flew up and grabbed his arm with strength he didn't expect. Her claws touched his skin, but she didn't press. "Easy," he said gently. "It's just me." She blinked at him, dazed, breathing hard. "Pain. Too much," she whispered, voice shaking. "I know," he said, and pressed the injector into her side. Her body tensed, then relaxed slowly. The painkiller working fast. Grant wiped the sweat from her face and covered her with his jacket. He sat beside her and took a deep breath. "You're burning up," he said quietly. "We need to keep the wound clean." Taraxa turned her face toward him, her voice weak. "You fixed me." "Trying to," he said. "Not exactly a field doctor." She looked at him for a long second, then said, "You didn't have to." He replied with a tired smile. "I keep doing things I don't have to." The wind outside shook. The broken pod, it was getting colder. And the sun had disappeared behind the smoke-filled sky. Grant added more scrap to the small fire and lit it again. The warmth slowly spread through the metal shell they were hiding in. Taraxa's breathing eased, and she lay still, watching him. He pulled out a survival rash. Just one left hand began to heat it. Taraxa turned her head toward the smell. It wasn't much, just a thick paste of protein and carbs. But after days of pain and emptiness, it smelled like a feast. Grant looked at her, and then at the small pot. He didn't say anything, just split it in half and handed her a warm piece wrapped in cloth. She hesitated again, as always, and then accepted it. Her claws brushed his hand again, so different, but not frightening anymore. She chewed slowly, watching his face. "Why do you share?" she asked. "You need food too?" He shrugged. "It tastes better with company." Taraxa tilted her head slightly. "Humans are strange." "You're not the first to say that," Grant replied with a grin. She took another bite and looked around the small pod. "This place was never meant to hold two people." "No," Grant said. "But we're not just people anymore. We're survivors." She nodded once, understanding the word in a deeper way. Later, as the fire dimmed, Taraxa whispered, "My people don't come back for the wounded." Grant glanced at her, listening. "If you slow them down, you're left behind." She stared at the ceiling, voice empty. "I knew the rule. I just didn't think they'd leave me." Grant didn't speak right away. He poked the fire gently, then said, "Same rule exists with some human units too." She turned to him, surprised. "Then why didn't they leave you?" He laughed softly, but it didn't sound happy. "Oh, they did. I'm the only one who came back." Silence again, but this one felt deeper, heavier. Shared pain created a new thread between them. Not just trust, understanding. They weren't just wounded anymore. They were two people carrying the weight of being forgotten. Taraxa lowered her head slowly and whispered, "If I die tonight, at least someone stayed." "You're not dying tonight," Grant said, and reached out. He gently squeezed her hand, her large, clawed hand in his smaller one. "I'm staying," he said again. "Until when?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Until you walk again," he promised, "even if it takes forever." Grant looked into her eyes. Even if it takes forever, outside the world remained cruel and broken. But inside that tiny, shattered pod, something rare lived on: hope. Not just survival, but the hope that maybe, just maybe, an alien and a human could be more than enemies. The morning was quiet, but not peaceful. Grant was outside the broken pod, searching for dry scraps of wood and metal to burn. The sky above was still dark from smoke, but in the distance, the sun tried to rise behind the ruined battlefield. He moved carefully, every sound making him alert. They had survived another night, but that didn't mean they were safe. Taraxa lay inside the pod, half awake. Her legs still hurt, but the pain was dull, now not sharp like before. She stared at the ceiling and listened to Grant's footsteps outside. The human kept his promise. He hadn't left her, not even once, in her own world. That kind of loyalty was rare, especially for someone like her who had failed in the eyes of her people. Suddenly, a strange buzzing sound broke the silence. Taraxa's ears twitched and her eyes narrowed. The sound wasn't natural, it was mechanical, sharp, and getting closer. She tried to sit up and called weakly, "Grant, come back." Grant froze outside, already hearing it. He dropped the wood and ducked behind a burnt-out vehicle. Hovering in the sky was a drone, sleek, black, and deadly. It wasn't human or Zarnik, it belonged to the cleaners. Machines. Built by both sides to erase evidence and eliminate stragglers. If it spotted either of them, it would not ask questions, it would strike. Grant crawled back toward the pod quickly, heart pounding. He slid inside and pulled the door shut. Taraxa was already trying to lift her weaponless arm. "What is it?" she asked, voice tense. "Cleaner drone," Grant whispered. Peeking through a small crack, "They're scanning the area, probably think we're just leftovers." He turned to her, eyes serious. "If it sees us moving, it'll fire." Taraxa nodded. Understanding the danger, she pressed her back against the wall, trying not to breathe too loudly. Her body still trembled from weakness, but her eyes were sharp again. The warrior in her was waking up. Even if she couldn't fight, she could still survive. The buzzing got louder. Red lights from the drone swept over the pod and the wreckage outside. Grant held his breath and kept still, his muscles tight inside the pod. The heat rose and sweat ran down his neck. One wrong move, one noise, and it would be over. The drone hovered for several long minutes, then flew off toward the west. They both waited a full minute in silence. Then Grant let out a shaky breath. "We're still alive," he said quietly. Taraxa opened her eyes and looked at him. "Not for long if we stay here," she whispered. He nodded. "Yeah. I was thinking the same." He sat down beside her, pulling out the last of the rations. "We need a new place to hide, something deeper underground." "There's a crash site," she said, her voice low. "Southwest, 1 mile. An old Zarnak drop base. Might still be there." Grant looked at her, surprised. "Can you walk that far?" "No," she replied, "but you can carry me." Grant sighed and nodded. His body was sore, tired, and bruised. But he didn't argue. "We'll move at night," he said. "Too risky in the daylight." She agreed with a slow blink. He checked her bandages and packed their few belongings. A piece of metal to reflect heat, a sharp rod for defense, and their only bottle of water. They didn't have much, but they had each other. That night, under a half-moon sky, they moved. Grant carried her on his back, step by step through the dust and rubble. Taraxa's arm wrapped around his shoulder, and she tried to stay light. "You're heavy," he muttered, breathing hard. She smiled weakly. "Then stop eating all the rations." He laughed quietly, even in pain. The ground was uneven and the air was cold, but they pushed on, hiding behind wreckage when drones passed overhead. At one point, they had to cross a ditch filled with mud and broken armor. Grant slipped and fell to one knee. Taraxa let out a small cry of pain as her leg hit the edge. Sorry," he whispered. Holding her tight, "I'm fine," she said, through gritted teeth. "Keep going," he did, finally, as the night grew darker. They saw it, a half-buried Zarnak drop base, hidden under twisted steel and dust. It was old, broken, but it might still have shelter inside. Grant placed her down gently and cleared the entrance. He pulled the door open, creaked, but didn't collapse inside. It was dark and musty, but safe from drones. They were both exhausted, but alive. He laid her down on an old metal bench, covered her with his jacket. "Rest," he said softly. "We made it." She looked up at him, eyes glowing softly in the dark. "You carried me through death's shadow." Grant smiled. "And I'll carry you further if I have to." She closed her eyes with a quiet whisper. "Then maybe I won't be afraid tomorrow." The sun was rising again, red and slow, inside the broken Zarnak drop base. Grant sat with his back against the wall. He hadn't slept much, his eyes always checking the shadows and listening for drones. Taraxa lay nearby, her chest moving slowly. As she slept, her body still weak, but she had made it through the night. That meant something. It meant hope wasn't dead yet. Grant rubbed his face with tired hands and took a deep breath. They couldn't stay here long. The drop base had no power, no supplies, and the roof was half broken. More drones would come, or worse, scavengers. They had to keep moving, but where? When Taraxa woke, she saw Grant pacing quietly. "You didn't rest," she said, her voice soft. He shook his head, didn't feel safe enough. She tried to sit up, but her legs still ached badly. She hissed in pain, biting her lip. Grant rushed to her side and helped her sit. He checked her bandage and frowned. "We need real medicine," he muttered. "Not just scraps." Taraxa thought for a moment, her face tense. "There is a border zone," she said, "about 5 miles. From here, a neutral post-hold medical station it might still work." Grant nodded slowly. 5 miles. Sounds like a journey. She looked at him with a half smile. "You carried me 1 mile. What's 5 more?" He laughed under his breath. "You're getting heavy." "You know," she raised an eyebrow, "or maybe you're just getting weak." He grinned. "Maybe both." That night, they prepared again. Grant wrapped her tighter, adjusted the strap of his gear, and lifted her onto his back. She said nothing, but her arms wrapped gently around his neck. They moved through the wasteland slow. Careful steps across cracked land and burnt stone. The night air was dry, filled with the scent of ash and old fire. Drones passed high above them, and once they had to hide beneath a dead transport ship. Grant crouched low, his body shaking with effort. Taraxa whispered in his ear, "You don't have to do this." He didn't reply, just kept walking. Hours passed, and Grant's legs began to tremble. He had carried her far. But the terrain was getting harder. They reached a canyon filled with jagged rocks and glowing cracks. A place where the war had scorched the earth. He looked at it and sighed. "That looks dangerous." Taraxa squinted at it. "It's the fastest way we go around." "It'll take 2 days." "We don't have 2 days," Grant said, and stepped forward. The rocks were sharp, and the ground sometimes shifted under. His feet, one false step could send them falling, but he moved slowly, holding Taraxa tight. She tried to help, pointing where to step, keeping him balanced. "You're stronger than I thought," she whispered once. "You're heavier than I thought," he replied with a tired smile. She chuckled weakly. "We make a good team." His eyes softened. "Yeah, we really do." Halfway through the canyon, Grant's foot slipped. He fell to one knee with a cry, and Taraxa almost tumbled off his back. She gasped and grabbed his shoulders. "Are you hurt?" she asked, panic. In her voice, he groaned. "No. Just tired." She looked at him closely. His hands were cut, his back soaked in sweat. She clenched her teeth and said, "Put me down." "No," he muttered, standing again. "Put me down." She snapped louder this time. Grant finally lowered her carefully onto a rock. He collapsed beside her. Breathing hard, they sat in silence for a while. The stars above were bright. Watching silently, Taraxa turned to him. "You can't carry me the whole way." He didn't answer, just stared at the sky. "I will crawl if I have to," she said, "but you can't break yourself for me." He turned his head and looked into her eyes. "Too late for that," he whispered. "You matter now." Taraxa's chest tightened at those words. She had been ready to die in battle, ready to be left behind. But this human, this tired, kind, foolish man refused to let go. "I'll walk," she said. "With your help," Grant nodded and helped her up. They moved together, now slow, step by step. He supported her with his arm, and she leaned into him, together. They reached the edge of the canyon just before dawn, and in the distance they saw a tall tower with a fading white flag. The medical station still stood. They both stared in silence. It wasn't victory, but it was hope, and they had earned it with pain, fire, and the will to keep moving forward. The sky was turning orange when they reached the fence. The old medical station stood tall but worn, with rust on the walls and broken lights flickering above the gate. It wasn't much, but to Grant and Taraxa, it looked like heaven. They had crossed a battlefield, crawled through wastelands, dodged death many times. Now they were finally here. Grant banged on the metal gate with a piece of scrap. "Hello," he shouted. "Anyone inside? Need help?" There was silence at first, then the sound of boots. A hatch opened above them, and a tired man with a scruffy beard looked down. "Human?" the man asked, squinting at Grant. "Yes," Grant called back, "and I'm not alone. I've got someone with me injured." The man looked down at Taraxa, and his face changed. His voice turned cold. "That's a Zarnok soldier." Grant didn't flinch. "She's hurt. Bad, she needs help. We don't treat aliens." The man replied sharply, "Especially ones that try to kill us." "She didn't try to kill us," Grant said, louder now. "She's the reason I'm still alive." The man above hesitated, then shouted back, "Wait there." The hatch slammed shut, and they stood in silence. Taraxa leaned against Grant, her legs weak and shaking. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice low. "They won't let me in." Grant shook his head. "Then I won't go." In either 10 long minutes passed, then the gate creaked open slowly. 3 people stood there, 2 humans in armor and 1 tall alien with a white robe. The robed alien stepped forward, her eyes glowing faintly blue. She studied Taraxa with a serious expression. "Zarnok warrior," she said calmly. "You should not be alive." Taraxa forced herself to stand straighter, her voice steady. "But I am." The robed alien turned to Grant. "You carried her across the wastelands." "Yes," he replied, "because her own people left her. And what do you want in return?" The woman asked. "Nothing," he said. "Just a chance for her to live." There was a long silence. The robed alien glanced at the guards and gave a slight nod. "Bring them in," she said. The guards stepped aside, and Grant half-carried Taraxa through the gates. Inside was a small, clean area, with medical beds, water tanks, and tired faces watching from the corners. They were outcasts, humans, aliens, anyone who didn't belong anymore. And now, Grant and Taraxa were part of them. Taraxa was placed gently on a bed. The robed alien scanned her body with a soft device. "She has a deep burn. Infection and blood loss," she said. "Can you save her?" Grant asked, stepping close. The healer nodded. "Yes, but she will need rest." For the first time in many days, Grant allowed himself to relax. He sat beside the bed, watching as they cleaned Taraxa's wound and gave her real medicine. Her breathing eased, and her face looked peaceful. No pain, no fear, just sleep. He smiled, wiping sweat and dirt from his face. She was safe now. Later, one of the guards approached him. "You know what people are saying?" The man asked. "That you brought an enemy into our home." Grant looked up, tired but firm. "She's not just an enemy," he said. "She's a person, like us." The guard crossed his arms. "You're lucky they let her stay." Grant stood up slowly. "I didn't bring her here because of luck. I brought her here because it was right." That night, Grant stayed beside her bed. He didn't leave. Even when the healer offered him a place to sleep, Taraxa woke once in the dark and found his hand holding hers. "You stayed again," she whispered. "I told you I would," he said with a small smile. "Even now." "Especially now." She blinked slowly, then said, "My people offered me rank and honor once. Now I have none of that, but I think I found something better." Grant looked at her, his voice soft. "Yeah. Yes," she whispered. "I found someone who didn't give up on me." He squeezed her hand gently. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "Not while I'm here." Outside the medical station, the war still burned in other places, but inside those walls, 2 lives had changed. Not through violence or orders, but through care, courage, and staying. And sometimes, staying was the most powerful thing of all. Weeks passed. The war outside slowed down, then stopped. Armies retreated. Leaders signed peace talks, and the killing finally paused. But for Grant and Taraxa, peace had already started the day they chose not to be enemies. Now, inside the neutral medical station, life moved on slowly, but for them. Every day felt like a victory. Taraxa's leg had healed enough for her to walk short distances. She leaned on a metal stick, her posture proud, even with a limp. She carried herself like a warrior, but her eyes, they had changed. They were softer now, more open. No longer filled with cold fire, sometimes they were filled with something warmer. When she looked at Grant, Grant spent his days helping the medics and guards. He fixed broken panels, cooked food, and repaired old water lines. But every hour, no matter what he was doing, he checked on her. It became a habit, like breathing. And she noticed every time, one quiet evening, they sat under the half-broken shelter outside the station. The sky was clear for once, stars shining. Like silver dust above them, Taraxa leaned against the wall, while Grant sat beside her. Arms crossed, "You walk better now," he said with a smile. She tapped her cane on the ground. "You're still slower than me," he laughed. "Not a chance." There was a peaceful silence between them. Then she asked, "What will you do now?" Grant shrugged. "No army left to serve. No war to fight," he added. "Maybe I'll grow vegetables." Taraxa blinked, confused. "Vegetables?" He nodded. "Yeah, a little farm, maybe quiet, safe." She looked at him for a moment, then said softly, "You were a soldier, a fighter." "Still am," he replied. "But I'd rather fight to protect something good now." She looked away for a moment, then said, "My people called me back." Grant's smile faded slightly. "Are you going?" "They offered medals, status, even command," she said quietly. He nodded slowly, trying to hide the pain behind his eyes. "But," she added, "they didn't offer me what I found here." Grant looked at her, confused. "And what's that?" She met his eyes, steady and calm. "Someone who chose me. Not for what I could kill, but for who I am." His heart beat faster. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Taraxa smiled gently. "You didn't walk away? I couldn't." He whispered, "You matter too much." A voice called out from inside the station. A young alien boy ran up with excitement in his eyes. Visitors just arrived from both sides. He shouted, "They're looking for the warrior and the human who crossed the wasteland together." Taraxa and Grant stood slowly, exchanging a look. "What do you think they want?" he asked. She narrowed her eyes, "Probably to make a story out of us." He grinned. "We are a pretty good story." As they walked toward the main hall, people gathered. Soldiers, healers, diplomats even. A few children stood in awe. Someone began clapping, and soon others joined. They walked side by side, human and alien, limping but proud. Their story had already traveled across the war zones. The tale of an enemy saved. And a soldier who stayed. A commander stepped forward, offering a medal to Grant. He looked at it, then looked at Taraxa. And without taking it, he said, I didn't do this for medals. The room grew quiet. He took Tarax's hand instead and lifted it gently. I did it because no one should be left behind. Tarax's people stepped forward too, offering her a decorated cape and a golden mark of rank. She looked at the items, then at Grant, with quiet strength. She stepped back and said, "I already earned something better." Then she turned to the crowd. This human reminded me that survival isn't enough. Kindness is stronger than power. Everyone watched in silence, moved and unsure, but something shifted, something invisible but strong. Respect, understanding, even unity. And it all started because one man stayed behind when others walked away. That night, back under the stars, Taraxa looked at Grant again. "I'm not going back," Keishi said. He smiled softly. "Then stay with me." She nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. They sat there for a long time. No more running, no more war. Just a hearts once enemies, now something more.